John Zeratsky, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me.
So you co-authored a book, Make Time, How to Focus on What Matters Every Day. This is interesting because your co-author, Jake, and you both worked at Google, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So you guys, and you also spent time designing the apps that people spend a lot of time on, right? Gmail, YouTube, the things that people are like, oh, I need to like get a handle on this stuff. But then you guys come out with a book saying, here's how to manage your time and not be distracted by these things we help create. I mean, what was the impetus behind the book? Like, did you guys have a problem with this stuff too?
Yeah, definitely. So as you pointed out, working in technology, working on these products was such an interesting spot for us to be, because on the one hand, we're working on apps that people find very distracting, that people struggle with. And so we're kind of on the inside and we know how these things are made, and that gives us ideas for how people might make some adjustments, make some changes to affect that relationship. But the other thing that was pretty interesting was technology in many ways is kind of the ground zero or the epicenter for a lot of what's crazy about our work cultures and about the defaults that we all operate under. So, big tech companies, lots of meetings, lots of email, there's instant messaging, there's an expectation that you're going to be online, you're going to be plugged in, you're going to be responsive. So we both struggled working in that environment to feel like we were using our energy and our time well at work, but also having something left over for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, you make the point, like these apps, like they definitely help our lives, right? They improve our lives. But if you have to learn how to manage it and take control of it instead of them controlling you. Let's talk about, you had this moment, this epiphany, right? You were working and you felt like you were just like missing out like on months of your life, right? Like you didn't realize that like 3 months had passed and you couldn't remember like what happened during those 3 months. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So maybe to put that in context, we can go back to 2005 when I graduated from college, and I was lucky enough to get a job at a tech startup in Chicago called FeedBurner. And I'd been in school and I had started a little web design business. So, I had sort of developed some habits and some ways of making sure I was productive, I was getting things done. But I was dropped into this company and this team that was very high performing. It was kind of the classic ideal of a tech startup. It was hard work, hustle, long hours. People were super smart, super talented. And I wanted to thrive in that environment. I wanted to make the most of that opportunity. So I got really obsessed with productivity. And when I say productivity, I mean it in kind of the sense of trying to be as optimized and efficient and leave no scrap of time unused. So I became obsessed with the book Getting Things Done. That was sort of like my Bible. And I had the filing system and the to-do lists, and I had the stack of note cards that I carried with me at all times. And to a certain extent that worked, but I always felt like there had to be a better way. I felt like being productive was good, but it often just kind of made me feel like a machine, just sort of like cranking through these endless lists of tasks I needed to do. In 2007, FeedBurner was bought by Google. And so then I was working at Google, and life was really good. Like I had this great job. I had a great girlfriend who's now my wife. We had just moved into a new place in Chicago. But like you said, I woke up one day with kind of this feeling that time was just slipping away from me. And I started to try to figure out what was going on. And I realized that I didn't have anything of substance going on day to day that I could sort of hold on to. I was in this productivity mindset of just cranking through, going to the meetings, answering the emails, getting things done. But it was all kind of at this consistent level of these, small tasks. And it just led to this feeling that time was slipping away.
Right. And then, I mean, I think we've all experienced that. And the way I kind of describe it, the way I've experienced is that I remember as a kid, I had these memories from like being a kid where I just like these moments, right? That they were really mundane, but for whatever reason, they stuck with me. And then as an adult, I found like I got fewer of those, right?
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
you do the same thing day in and day out, and everything just sort of bleeds together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our days, living as professionals in the 21st century, I think that our days tend to be made up of mostly small, kind of inconsequential tasks, things that happen. And the process of forming memories, it happens automatically. It just sort of some things might stick out, some things might not. But when nothing is sort of that big of a deal, I think it's difficult to create those memories that make you feel like you're living in time instead of just like, seeing time move by. I read around that time when I was struggling, this was like 2008, I read a book called Wrapped by Winifred Gallagher. It was a really incredible book that has stuck with me for a long time. And she makes the argument that your experience of life is not necessarily what happens to you, it's what you pay attention to. And that was a big turning point for me. I realized that if I started to intentionally build my days around the things that I wanted to remember, then I could choose to pay attention to those. And that would have the effect of sort of slowing down the passage of time. Very much like, being a kid and just having those summers that went on and those amazing memories from those days.
Yeah. So, okay, the solution to this was this thing you called highlights. So what is a highlight?
Yeah. So a highlight is the one activity or thing that you want to prioritize and protect in your day. So the idea is that it's not the only thing you'll do, and it's not like, I don't think I'm unrealistic. I don't want to encourage people to like, have this expectation that they can completely clear their calendar, clear their day. But by choosing a highlight, you can kind of build your day around it. You can make sure that no matter what else happens, you made time for that one thing, and you can feel like that time was well spent.
So, I mean, what's an example of that? I mean, is this like, are the highlights like work related, or are they like something that just makes your life meaningful that you want to do?
Yeah, for me, they're all of the above. They tend to be more work related stuff for me. Like I often spend time on my highlight first thing in the morning, right after I wake up. I went through this process of becoming a morning person about 5-6 years ago. So I love to wake up, make some coffee, and work on my highlight, which is usually writing something or doing some kind of design work or something that's related to work. But in the book, we talk about a few different kind of approaches for coming up with your highlight. And what I described is, I think, kind of an example of satisfaction, looking at what task or activity is going to be really satisfying. It's not necessarily the most urgent thing, but it's the thing that it's going to be a good chunk of work that you want to do and you feel good about doing it. But sometimes my highlight is something that needs to get done, something that's urgent. And that's another strategy. And a lot of times, like on Saturday, my wife and we just moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we're taking a food tour that's sort of a tour of Milwaukee for Milwaukeeans. And so I know that on Saturday, like that's going to be my highlight. Like that's going to be the thing. It's not something I have to get done. It's not something productive, but it's something that I want to do. And I'm going to kind of build my day around really enjoying and savoring that.
So as long as you accomplish your highlight, like that day was a win, even if you didn't get much done else.
That's my take. I think there's always bad stuff that can happen to us, but my experience, and I think experience that's backed up by some research and by experiences of other people who have read about this stuff as we've been writing about it before the book, just on the web. It seems to be the case that when you build your days around one thing that you want to make time for, time moves more slowly and you feel better about the way you spent that time.
So let's talk about how you establish these highlights. Because like, I think people have heard the idea of, people establish goals for themselves, but usually goals are often abstract and too far away in the future. It's like, well, save for retirement, or like, I'm going to go on a vacation.
Totally.
So how does a highlight differ from a goal in that regard?
Yeah. I mean, a highlight is really short term. It's something that you want to do that day. It's very much a daily process. And I think Jake and I kind of have this hypothesis that most advice about time management and self-help kind of stuff is way too intimidating. It's really big. It's like, what do you want your life to be? Where do you want to be in 5 years? It's really grand. And I think when you're feeling busy and you're feeling distracted and you're feeling like you're on autopilot and like the days are sort of flying by, trying to break from that and all of a sudden shift into thinking about these grand plans, I think is pretty tough. It's pretty unrealistic. So our belief is that if you can start small, you can start by identifying what you want to do that day, the thing you want to make time for, and then starting to reclaim a little bit of the time that you might otherwise lose to your smartphone, social media, meetings, email, whatever. A lot of these default behaviors, if you can start to reclaim a little bit of that time, it can build from there. You'll have a little bit more space, a little bit more time to think about what's important to you. You'll recognize the things that you enjoy doing, the things that are motivating to you, that create that clarity and sense of purpose around your time. And those might build into something really grand and big. They might build into, some trip or a career change or retirement, but they might not. They might just be something that makes your existing life a little bit better, a little bit slower, a little bit, more joyful.
Well, one example you give in the book of a highlight was you and your wife, built this boat and wanted to go sailing. So that's like a huge goal. So like, did you just break it down? Like, you decided Saturday is going to be boat day. I'm going to make at least 2 hours for boat day. Is that how that worked?
Kind of, yeah. And just to make sure that I'm not getting any undue credit, we did not build a boat.
Okay. You had to repair it though, right?
Yeah, we bought an old boat and then we ended up selling that one and getting a different boat. And yeah, we ultimately ended up spending about 8 months on the boat. We sailed from San Francisco all the way down the coast of North America to Panama. Boat's in Panama right now, and we'll be spending another probably 6 months on the boat this winter. But yeah, what you said about sort of on the weekend days, using that same approach of having a highlight and saying, what's the thing that we want to focus on now that's going to move us toward this goal? That's exactly what we did. I think that we were, so I've kind of a maybe unconventional way of thinking about goals. And it's that I feel like goals are risky. I think that you touched on how there's sort of these abstract, amorphous things. And I think that they create sort of a feeling that we're not good enough yet because we haven't reached our goal. And if only we reach our goal, then we'll be satisfied. Then we'll be happy with ourselves, which I don't think is a great way to live day to day. I also think that they blind us to what's happening in the present. If we become so fixed on a goal that we're working toward, we might not notice when our priorities change. We might not follow something that appears that we enjoy doing in the meantime. So for my wife and me, I wouldn't say that we made this sailing plan. It's called cruising in the sailing world. That's the idea of traveling by sailboat. I wouldn't say that we made cruising a goal until very late in the game, until we got to the point where like there was a finite set of things that we needed to do to prepare the boat, to prepare ourselves to be ready to actually leave at a certain time. And then, we got into, making spreadsheets and to-do lists and all the sort of typical stuff you do when you're managing a big project. But earlier on, for me, it was really about trying to find the skills or the behaviors that I wanted to develop so that I would be in a position to go cruising, to pursue this goal, and use my highlights and use my time to develop those skills and those behaviors.
And so you guys, as you said, there's different ways to pick your highlight of the day. One could be, the sense of urgency, like this has to get done, right? In order for me to move forward at work, whatever. So that's one way to pick a highlight. And the other one is just like also like joy and satisfaction, like the one thing you think
Yeah.
That's tricky too, because sometimes we think something will give us satisfaction and joy, but we do it
Yeah,
and it
totally.
doesn't. But I mean, I think that's one of the nice things about highlights. Instead of like, one of the problems with goals, as you said, you kind of get fixated on it. You get goal lock and you keep pursuing it because like you feel like you should. But like I feel like the highlight concept, it's a little more, it's flexible. So it's like, well,
Yeah.
that didn't really bring me satisfaction. All right, move on to something else.
Yeah, totally. I mean, flexibility and really like forgiveness, is sort of, those are some of the key philosophies behind this book. Jake and I being obsessed with this idea of redesigning time, of how we spend our time. We've read tons of books and blog posts, and we've read all the things about, the 18 things you should do before 8 a.m. and that all that kind of advice that you see. And I just feel like so much of it is so intense and so unforgiving. And so we think that making these changes to how you're spending your time is better approached from a standpoint of flexibility and forgiveness, to be able to say, I don't know what I want to be doing in 5 years. And I know I'm not going to completely remake my life overnight. And I'm not going to adopt this exact set of steps that is kind of being presented as a framework. But if I can start small and every day I can try to make time for something that is important, we know that people can build and those changes can compound. And, Jake and I both found that those led us to places, with the sailing stuff and with writing, that approach led us to places in our lives that we didn't necessarily plan. Those weren't necessarily goals. They weren't things that we saw coming.
I mean, another sort of mindset shift that I thought was really useful. Let's take this task of getting a boat ready to go sailing around the world. As you said, there's like all these things you have to do to get ready. And the tendency, the self-help, the productivity books to say like you need to, set a deadline for each of these little tasks, right? But then like I've done that before, and what ends up happening is like all of my tasks are overdue. Right? I've got that like right now. I use Todoist, and I'm like, all right, this week this task is gonna be done by this step, and then like it was due 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And it's like in red saying I need to get this done. You guys said instead of doing that, like having these sort of like assigned tasks for certain days, like have instead of like a task list, have a might, or instead of having a to-do list, have a might do list, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you go in like, so today is boat day. I'm going to spend 2 hours. Here's a list of tasks that I could possibly do.
Yeah.
Now, why do you think that's so powerful in like moving forward on those things that are really meaningful to you?
Yeah. And that's very much how I plan my days, ongoing. I think what's powerful about the might do list is that it separates the decision about what you should do or what you could do from the act of doing it. I think that if you sit down in front of a to-do list that is neatly organized and categorized and everything's got a priority and a deadline and all these different things, there's a good chance that you're not going to end up spending time on the most important things. You might knock off the easy things or the things that are maybe they appear the most urgent because you put a date on them and they're overdue, but maybe they're not actually the most important things that you should be doing. Whereas I think if you have a list, a might do list, is what I call it, and before you sit down to start working on that stuff, you review that and you think about what's important to do in that time, and then you schedule it. I think that you have a much better chance of actually spending your time on the things that are important. So I don't even use a to-do list at all. I just have a note in Google Keep. So it's on my computer and on my phone. It's just my like one big might do list, and it has a couple of headings in it, but there's no like priority. There's no dates. The calendar is really where I sort of handle, the question of when am I going to do things. But I think that very human process of reviewing and intuitively deciding here's what's important now is essential. And I think it's something that to-do lists don't necessarily help us do.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed whenever I'm working on a larger task and I create to-do list, like as I get started working on the project, like I realize that what I thought was urgent is no longer urgent, or I need to solve this other problem first before I get to this. So it's like, I don't know. I think the idea of a might-do list gives them flexibility to, when you actually get started, you can make adaptations.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of a trick, right? It's like part of it is just in the framing, this idea that
Right.
instead of a to-do list, it's a might-do list. It's I think in that spirit of forgiveness and flexibility that we talked about a few minutes ago. And there's maybe that's not the most life-changing shift in thinking, but I do think that there's something valuable about it.
So we're going to be flexible with, what we do with this highlight, whatever we pick it to be. And here's a question: can your highlight change from day to day, or is this something where it's like you sit down on Sunday? And here's like another typical productivity tip: you got to plan your week on Sunday night, and decide what you're going to do each day of the week. Or is this concept a little more flexible? It's like, well, today is going to be boat day, or today is going to be writing memo day, or whatever.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah. So make time is really a daily framework. So we think that the day is kind of the sweet spot. That's the right size that we are capable of both thinking about in a productive way, but then actually acting on. When you create that plan for the week or the 1 year plan or the 5 year plan for yourself, it's too difficult to predict, to know what's really going to happen, how you're going to feel, what else is going to happen to you. And so the day kind of feels like a sweet spot. So setting a highlight is a daily activity. The other steps in the make time framework, laser, energize, and reflect, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Those are all daily activities. And yeah, the highlight can be something different every day. You can kind of jump between one day there might be something urgent you need to take care of. And then once you've got that off your plate, the next day you feel like you can do something really satisfying. The end of the week rolls around and you choose a joyful highlight, something that is just going to be really fun for you. The kind of the twist on that, or the exception, is when we're working on a big project, we often find it valuable to think of sort of a personal sprint. So essentially choosing the same highlight every day for a week or for longer, or highlights that are thematically related. So if you're working on, creating something new, and this was the case when we were writing Make Time, pretty much every day with a few exceptions, my highlight was about Make Time. It was about writing a draft of the next chapter, or reviewing something that Jake had written, or working on outlining a certain section. But having a sort of similar or the same highlight day after day, I think really allows us to get into the groove, to get into flow in a way that's difficult to do just, within one day. But that's kind of an advanced move. That's not really like sort of the basic way that the highlight works.
Right. Well, you guys co-authored a book called Sprint as well, where where you talk about the system you all used at Google to, get these big projects moving forward and completed.
Yeah. So that book is about the 5-day design sprint process, where a team goes from idea or challenge to a prototype that they can test with customers in 5 days. And running those sprints was really interesting for us, because it was almost like a time management laboratory where we got to bring all these people in and work with them and see how people reacted to changes in the defaults of how we spend our time, and make tweaks and try to improve things and see how it went. And one of the things that was really interesting is just the gains that you get from focusing on the same thing for a week. Instead of trying to move projects forward by, little bit and little bit, when you can sort of load all of that knowledge and expertise about what you're working on into your working memory, into your brain. It's not like you make 5 times as much progress because it's 5 days. You make way more. You make so much more progress because you don't have the switching costs. You don't have to reload your working memory every time you try to pick up that project again.
Gotcha. So I was thinking as I was listening to you, like taking this to, I can see how it work in your work life, right? There's a big project. You just spend 5 days, and every day that your highlight is going to be working on this project and moving it forward. But I was thinking in your personal life, right? Like one of the things that people try to do, but they try to do bits and pieces, like getting their house organized or their garage organized.
Yeah.
So they they spend like basically an hour every Saturday doing it.
Sure.
That's all they got. But like maybe you just set aside, okay, this week, every night for just an hour, our highlight is clean out and organize the garage.
Yeah, totally. Right? Yeah. I mean, I think that like that way of thinking about a project can be, almost freeing and really, really motivating, because when you have the clarity that that's what you have decided to do and that's what's important, you no longer feel like you're trying to squeeze it in between other stuff or kind of making that decision in real time. Like, oh, I could watch TV, but I really should clean the garage. Like when you've sort of made a plan and said, this is going to be my highlight is to after we finish dinner, we're going to go and we're going to work in the garage for an hour. I think it allows you to look forward to that and to enjoy it more, even if it's something that's, not really all that fun.
So we're pretty flexible with, the to-do list, might-do list. But the one thing you don't want to be flexible with on the highlight is like you set aside time for it and like you basically protect that with your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So when people are getting started with this, we kind of think that 60 to 90 minutes is a good chunk of time to spend on a highlight. It's something that most people can realistically create by adjusting their schedule and by reclaiming time from distracting and addicting apps and devices. But it's long enough that you can sink your teeth into it. You can kind of get in the groove. You can get into flow. You can feel like it was worthwhile. It was something meaningful.
All right. So let's talk about. So we've picked our highlight. We set aside time for it. We're going to protect it with our life. Say no to things, right? And I think that's the hard part for people. Stuff comes up, and you think, well, it's my highlight. I'm working on the garage. I could probably do that. Just say I already got plans, and people won't say anything. Let's talk about those things that distract us, right? That can sort of, if we spend too much time on it, it can seep into our highlight time. So you call these, let's talk about, you guys worked at Google. You call these things like email, YouTube, even web browsers. You call these things infinity pools. Why is that?
Yeah. So an infinity pool is any app or service or product that has an infinite and replenishing source of content inside of it. If you can pull to refresh, or if it streams nonstop, like the Netflix example of starting the next episode right after the previous one ends, that's an infinity pool. And we kind of came up with that term because, there's always more water in the pool. You can always jump back in. The level is never going to go down. It's never going to go away. It's never going to be empty. And these are really challenging. Infinity pools are a new invention in the history of humankind. Until just like 10 years ago, most things in our world were finite. And infinity pools, they pull on several of the threads that make up the fabric of who we are as humans, of how we evolved. For example, we evolved to really care about people and stories and gossip. So social media, Instagram showing photos of what other people are doing and what their lives are like, that's very appealing to us. We are naturally susceptible to distraction because if you think about a pre-industrial, pre-agricultural world, if there's a flash in the corner of your eye, you should probably check and look what it is. It might be a tree falling, or it might be a large animal. It might be, something you need to be aware of. Whereas today, most of the distractions are not actually important. And we also evolved to value what psychologists call variable rewards or random rewards. And sort of the classic example of this is a slot machine where you pull the handle and it's really easy and low cost to pull the handle. And most times nothing happens or nothing good happens. But on occasion, something amazing happens. There's always the chance that something really great is going to happen when you pull that handle. And if you think about it, that's exactly what these infinity pool apps are like. And we sort of evolved to value those things as well, because imagine you're hunting, you're gathering, you're trying to find food that you need to survive. And, some days you might go out and come back empty-handed. But every once in a while, something great happens. Every once in a while, you make a big kill, or you come across, a bush that's full of berries, or, you find some ripe fruit or something like that. And so really deep in our DNA, we've got this appreciation for and this love of these variable rewards.
And I mean, the other thing about infinity pools, if the whole goal of Make Time is to have more of these moments in our life, or that we remember. The thing with infinity pools, like if I look back and I think I've been using the internet for, I don't know, however long, 15, I don't know, I can't even, that's the thing, like it's all slipped by me. It's all amorphous. But like, I can't remember like a moment, like being on the internet and being like, I remember when I read this Reddit thread and it was awesome. I remember when I scrolled through Instagram, I saw this cool, like that never happens.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally true. And so I think like the combination of these innate human characteristics with just the sheer convenience, just the fact that these things are in our pockets or in our handbags or right in front of us, is just kind of this perfect storm. It's just this really powerful cocktail that tends to suck time away from us in a way that we don't even notice is happening. And those behaviors, one of the things we talk about a lot in the book is this idea of defaults, how these behaviors are not necessarily things we decided to do. It's not like there's some, grand master plan for the best way to spend your time every day. But because these infinity pool apps have become the defaults in our world, many of us just kind of find ourselves mindlessly checking them, or we pick up our phone for a quick check of something and we end up doing something else. And so what Jake and I have done, and what we encourage people to do, is to think about ways that they can change those defaults.
Right. So, I mean, some of you guys get pretty drastic. Like some of like just remove your email app from your phone, remove your web browser from your phone.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're all based on the same idea, which is that the best way to avoid distraction is to make it more difficult to get distracted. So to create barriers to distraction. Designers like us, we've spent years and years trying to remove the barriers, trying to make apps like email and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube as easy to get into and as easy to use as possible. You don't have to sign in. You stay signed in. You don't have to even think to open the app because there's a notification on your phone that reminds you about it. And we believe that by creating barriers to distraction, you can take willpower out of the equation. You can take self-control out of the equation. You don't need to constantly resist the urge to check these things, but by removing apps from your phone, by signing out of websites that are very distracting, even doing things like rearranging your living room so that the TV is not the focal point, can just make it a little bit more difficult to get sucked into these infinity pools. And they have the result then of freeing up that time for other things, freeing up that time for your highlight. Right.
And I think one tactic, like people are like, man, how could I ever like get by without email on my phone or a web browser? I mean, like with email, I don't have email on my phone anymore either. And what kind of finally realized that got me to remove is like, I've never answered email from my phone ever.
Yeah. All you do is look at it and get stressed out about all the things you're not answering.
Right. So yeah, I guess just be thoughtful about the apps you have on your phone. You guys also give suggestions. You have a website, right? What's the website? Make Time?
Oh yeah, for the book, the website is called maketimebook.com. That's the domain.
But you also you offer app suggestions that you can block certain things on your phone, and that's all useful. So the idea is just figure out what your defaults are and then rearrange those defaults to put obstruction between getting into these infinity pools.
Yeah, and as you touched on, like it can be pretty daunting or pretty extreme to think about, wow, like no email on my phone, like that's crazy. But we encourage people to think about, when it comes to infinity pool apps, we encourage people to think about what's the underlying value or purpose for using that thing. Because, we start using an app or service or a tool for a reason. There's obviously something good about it. So for example, you might be thinking about Facebook, and you might think, well, I like using Facebook because it allows me to keep in touch with my family, and I can see pictures of my friends' kids or something like that, and kind of follow that thread through to the conclusion of like, well, will I still be able to do that if I don't have it on my phone, if I don't have it at my fingertips at every moment? And the answer in most cases is yes. I use Twitter for a lot of kind of work-related stuff. That's how I kind of promote my work and talk to readers and answer questions. But I don't need it on my phone. I don't need to have access to it 24/7 to do that. I use Twitter on my computer. I use it for a limited time each day. And when I'm done with it, I log out and I close the tab and I go on with my day. Email kind of fits into that as well. There's actually some pretty interesting research that we write about in the book, where people who spend less time on email actually get better at email. So they're able to respond, like the time that it takes per message to respond, like gets shorter and shorter when people, just do email at the end of the day, or just have like a certain chunk of time when they do email. So I think the kind of the perspective that I'm talking through here is trying to be clear about why you use these things, and then ask yourself the question of whether it needs to be always on, always at your fingertips.
Right. So this is one of these tactics you guys highlights about, you all highlight about, this laser focus part of the make time process. So you have your highlights, and then you're going to laser in on it, where you're going to avoid distractions. So avoid these infinity pools. But you also talk about, avoiding, I think that's a really interesting point you made in the book, because I've fallen in this trap, is avoiding getting caught up, like spending so much time on your productivity system that you actually don't get actual things done. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's basically avoid the fancy tools, because that can get really exciting.
That's right. Yeah. And that's another one that came directly out of my own experience, just being, nerding out on like all the different to-do list apps and the project management apps and that kind of stuff. I think that these, I call them fancy tools. They feel like work, but they're not actually work. If you have an idea for an app that you are thinking of building, instead of, just grabbing a piece of paper and start sketching what the UI looks like, you think, oh, I need to have a fancy notebook and a really nice pen. Or if you want to start writing something, you have to go and download and install like a distraction-free writing app, or like one of these like dedicated screenplay writing apps. And those are just like sort of a form of procrastination. They're things that I think are easy to get into because they're kind of fun, and they're the path of least resistance. But when we really stop and think about it, they're not actually what we want to be doing, what we want to be spending our time on.
All right. They distract you. All right. So pick your highlight. You're going to laser. And there's a whole bunch of tactics, and we've talked about some of them, avoiding the infinity pools. The next part of the make time process is Energize. So this is like basically energy management. Why do you think that's an important part of personal productivity?
I think that focusing on building energy is important because it helps us avoid distraction in the first place, and kind of make better decisions in those moments, day to day, about what we're going to do next. So I've definitely been in a situation where like, I wake up and maybe I stayed up too late, or maybe I was like, I was watching TV too late, or I drank a little bit too much, or I had like a huge meal or something like that. And I wake up and I feel groggy or sluggish, or, not energized. And on those mornings, I'm way more likely to, jump into my email or open Twitter right away instead of spending time on my highlight. And, I think if you've ever, felt really sluggish after a big lunch, or if you've ever, felt kind of clear-headed and invigorated after going for a run, you can kind of see this connection between the energy that we create with our bodies and how that affects the decisions and the things that we do with our brains.
Right. So basically, the advice is like basically the stuff you've been hearing your entire life and learn how to live a healthy life. Get plenty of sleep, eat right, exercise. Any other tactics that you found to be very, pretty useful in energizing you?
Yeah. The big categories, like you're saying, are kind of the stuff that everybody already knows. So food, exercise, sleep. And then we also think that finding quiet, moments of quiet away from the noise of modern life, and spending face-to-face time with other people, we think that these are really important ways to build energy. But we also know that like this kind of advice is like it's everywhere and everybody already knows about it. So we try to translate that into really concrete, specific tactics that people can try, and that it doesn't represent some dramatically new extreme diet or some like super intense workout program, but kind of little things that you can fit into your day.
Right. And also, could like these things be a highlight for somebody? Like,
they definitely could be. I mean, I think that there's depending on what you're into and what you like, for example, cooking is I think an activity that can be a highlight. It can be something that improves the healthfulness of the food that you eat. And it can also be a way to give yourself energy by using your body, by moving your body. I actually took a lot of inspiration from some of your writing, Brett, about like kind of the strenuous life, this idea of doing things, of having a DIY life instead of a remote control life, when, instead of ordering delivery and using the laundry apps and the grocery delivery and all these things, all these conveniences that are available. Something like cooking kind of hits a few of those principles at the same time.
No, yeah, I think that's an interesting point. We did a series on Winston Churchill, and one of the interesting things about this guy, he had a weird schedule. Like he stayed up late, he slept in. He would dictate to his secretary while he's in his pajamas in his bed or in his bathtub. Weird guy, but he worked hard. Like when he was working hard. Yeah. But for a break, instead of just taking it easy, like he would go like build a wall in his garden or go paint. And that energized him to go back to whatever else you had to do.
Totally. Yeah, I feel that as well. Like I get a lot of satisfaction and frankly a lot of energy out of doing things the hard way. Kind of choosing the manual route, doing things where there is a clear sort of convenient way to do the thing, but choosing the harder way. Walking is a perfect example. It takes longer to walk most times, but I feel like it actually creates time because I'm getting energy from that activity, but I also have additional mental space that is happening while I'm walking. Same with cleaning or cooking or carrying something home from the store. It creates kind of this meditative space, this opportunity to allow ideas to emerge, to start to kind of reflect on what you're doing, how you're spending your time. So yeah, for me, those sort of, hands-on, almost those intentionally inconvenient approaches to everyday activities are really important.
No, yeah. I've noticed that like whenever I do nothing, it always sounds appealing, but then doing nothing can often just be like exhausting. I don't know why. So if I actually do something on my like a break, I come back to work more energized. It's bizarre. I don't know why it works that way. But
yeah, I mean, like taking a break from work and checking, Twitter is kind of like the classic example of that. It's like, oh, like this will be a cool break. I'll catch up on what's going on, and then you get done with it, and you're like, wait, that wasn't a break. Like I don't feel refreshed. I don't feel renewed. Now I need a real break.
Yeah, right, right. A real break. All right, so just basically take care of yourself so you can be more productive when you're working on the things that are important. So there's highlights, laser, energize, and then there's this reflect. What does that reflection process look like?
Yeah. So reflect might be the most important part of the whole thing. And the idea is that you'll spend just a couple minutes every day thinking back on how your day went. What was your highlight? Did you have time for it? And which tactics did you use? Are there things from the book that you tried? And did they work well? And if they didn't work well, what do you want to try again tomorrow? For me, this is something that like I've been kind of thinking about this stuff for so long, and I've been on this journey for so long that I do a lot of this reflection kind of intuitively. I have space in my day where I'm walking or I'm not actively engaged in work, and I'm always thinking about just how things are going. But I know that I'm a little bit weird in that way. So at the same time, there's a lot of advice out there, I think, about journaling and about stuff like that can feel pretty overwhelming. So we're trying to offer people a very small, very bite-sized activity that they can do to basically answer a couple of questions and put themselves in this experimental mindset, put themselves in this way of thinking that doesn't have perfection as a goal, doesn't have the perfect application of this 20-part system, but just has this spirit of like, just get a little better every day. Just do something a little different every day and see how it goes for you.
And I mean, here's the question: like, how do you keep this up day in and day out? Because that's the problem with what I found with like productivity systems, right? Like, getting things done. For example, I did that too back in whatever 2007, 2006 when it came out. And it's like, yeah, this is really cool. I went out and bought all the stuff and I did it for like 2 weeks, and then it's like, no,
yeah,
I got that collection of GTD stuff sitting there now.
Yeah.
So like with this, like, how do you keep it up day in and day out?
Yeah. I mean, I think that as much as possible, it's helpful to try to make some of these things automatic. So I know there's a lot of advice out there about creating habits, and I'm certainly not an expert on that, but I think to the extent that you can create habits around these activities, that's really helpful. I think even just shifting a mindset can really reinforce certain behaviors. But at the same time, like I don't know that there is necessarily an easy answer to that question. I think part of it has to come from an external sense of motivation, a sense that you want to change things or that you want to work toward something better. And I think that that's one of the results of this approach to making time, that as you start to create a little bit of space every day, you start to get a clearer view of where you're headed and what's important to you. For example, when my wife and I were just starting to get into sailing and we were spending time learning about our boat and fixing up our boat and taking short trips on the boat, we didn't necessarily have some grand plan that we were working toward, but the more time we spent on it and the more we used these techniques to create space in our days, the stronger motivation we were able to build about what we were working toward. And so, I don't have a perfect formula for how to, change your behavior overnight, how to make these changes stick. But I do think that starting to slow things down and create a little bit of space every day is the first step.
Well, John, where can people go to learn more about the book? We already talked about Make Time Book, right?
That's right. Yeah. MakeTimeBook.com. Great place to go just to follow. Everything that Jake and I are doing and writing about is Time Dorks.
Time Dorks.
So that's our newsletter. It's all about experiments and time management. And then perhaps ironically, I would suggest that people follow me on Twitter as well. My username is Jazzer, Jazer.
It's when they're taking their fake break. They can check you out.
Exactly.
Right. Well, hey, John, this has been a great conversation. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brad.
My guest today is John Zeratsky. He's the co-author of the book Make Time. It's available on Amazon.com and bookstores everywhere. You can also find out more information about the book at his website, maketimebook.com, all one word. You can find links to tools and free resources there. Also, check out our show notes at aom.is/maketime, where you can find links to resources, where you can delve deeper into this topic and to put it into action.